This is Good&Game, a collection of conversations with people living with intention and armed with the courage to make a positive impact in our world. These are heart-centered people from America's heartland. Hey, welcome in. My name is Michael Admire. This is Conversation 2.2 in our fall collection. All fall, we're diving into one topic: environmental pollution and the impact it has on the health of Iowans. We're also meeting the people who are on the front lines trying to make a difference. And today's conversation is with someone who's been making a difference in Iowans' lives for decades. Dr. Richard Deming is the medical director at the Richard Deming Cancer Center in Des Moines, Iowa. There are more people surviving cancer than ever before in Iowa, and there's no doubt Dr. Deming's approach to treating the person, not just the disease, is why. Part of Dr. Deming's treatment includes counseling, spiritual connection, nutrition, connecting to nature, and all-around wellness. Dr. Deming is a founder of Above and Beyond Cancer, which is a nonprofit organization that leads cancer survivors on challenging expeditions around the globe. His passion for treating people and connecting them to healthy practices that include getting out in nature give us a unique perspective on this topic at hand. So here is the conversation with Dr. Richard Deming. We were talking a little bit off camera how we met for the first time. It was a interview on a story about Maria Steele, was over at your office, and it was such a great conversation, and one that has really stayed with me, obviously. This conversation that we're having today is really a continuation of that. But yeah, Maria is just such a joy, and her story is incredible.
An inspiration, on so many levels. Yes, I'm so glad that we had that opportunity to talk about Maria. And for those who don't know, Maria is, first of all, she's a nurse practitioner, so she has spent her career in healthcare. And just because you're a nurse provider or a doctor in healthcare doesn't make you immune to health problems. And not only has she been a lifelong professional in healthcare, but she also is a person who cares about wellness and living healthy and enjoying life. And lo and behold, here at this point in her life, in about age 60, just out of the blue, is diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer as someone who has never smoked and has led a healthy life. So lung cancer with metastatic disease to the bone and to the brain. It tells us several things. One, that we all are at risk for developing cancer. Number two, that sometimes living a healthy lifestyle doesn't prevent all cancers. Number three, even people who live a healthy lifestyle and don't smoke can still get lung cancer. Four, it reminds us that there are screening tests for certain cancers, and that in the world of cancer control, it's about how do we prevent those cancers that can be prevented? How do we do screening and find cancers at an early stage when the cure is more likely? And then third, how do we assemble the right team and do modern treatment based on new research that has the best chance of controlling cancer? And then I would say and there's probably 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but 4 is how do we, as professionals in the cancer world, make sure we're not just focusing on how do you kill a cancer cell. It's how do you take care of a patient and their family? How do you help them not just have the best chance of controlling cancer in the body? How do you help them thrive as individuals and lead a life that is filled with joy, even in the face of an incurable cancer? Maria an amazing person. She was amazing even without her cancer, and an amazing, wife and mother and grandmother and professional. But her approach to cancer with her family is like many people. When you're told you have cancer, it's like, even for a healthcare professional, like, what the? It changes everything. Being told you have cancer, especially being told that you have stage 4 cancer, reminds you of two things you kind of intellectually know, but you try to forget every day. One of those things is you're going to die someday. We are mortal. And number 2, you don't know when that's going to be. So Maria, like anyone facing cancer, learns as much as they can about the journey they're embarking on. Second, assembles a team, both professional and personal, that's just going to have your back and be with you on the journey. And then 3, begin that journey with hope and optimism. And Maria not only does all of that, but the thing that inspires me the most about Maria, she's taken this predicament in her own life and used it as a springboard to not only the way she lives her life, but to being out there as an advocate, teaching lawmakers and the public about the risks of radon. So her lung cancer in a woman who never smoked, living in Iowa, most likely was caused by radon. How do you use your own predicament to help educate the public about what is radon? How does it get into our homes? How do we know if it's in our homes? How do we check for it? How do we mitigate if it's in our homes? How do we then proceed with screening for lung cancer and knowing about the best possible treatment? So even while she's going on this journey, not alone, with family and friends and professionals, on this journey with a cancer that's not curable, still thinking of others and using her own experience as kind of a soapbox and a megaphone to amplify her voice and help others have a better journey themselves.
Yeah, she has certainly, turned a tough situation and turned around into a positive for others. And yeah, the story that I sat down with you with was, she's about to take off on a bike ride from Canada to Mexico.
Yes.
And all in the midst.
She and her husband are on a bike ride. Here they are dealing with, a lifelong stage 4 cancer on oral chemotherapy, but going to still pursue what they love doing, bicycling, but actually to take on a challenge like riding all the way from Canada to Mexico, using it as a platform again to advocate for knowledge about radon, for advocating for screening for lung cancer, advocate for access to treatment, even in the midst of what she's going through. Amazing.
Well, she personally inspired me in many ways. She first sent me the numbers of what was going on in Iowa and said, hey, there's a greater story here. She also talked to me about radon mitigation. She said, do you have a radon mitigation system in your house? Have you checked for radon? And we got ours installed finally last week. So we now have our radon mitigation system in our 1920-something house. So yeah, she's inspired me in a couple ways. And I know you have inspired her in many ways. One of the things I remember from our conversation is that you say, every time you sit down with a patient, a person, anytime you sit down with somebody that you're caring for, one of the first questions you ask them is, what has brought you joy since we last met? So I feel like that could be a good spot for us to start talking about Dr. Deming. What has brought you joy since we last talked all the way in August of 2024? It's been a minute.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. It's a great question. And sort of the background, I believe firmly that it is the job of humans, a mortal species, to really spend time thinking about what brings you joy. We all know people that think they want to live forever and don't have a clue what they could do this afternoon to bring joy to their life or to bring joy to somebody else's lives. So I have found in contemplation that things that bring me joy are helping other people, being engaged in vigorous physical activity, being outdoors in nature, and spending time with people I care about. Those are pretty fundamental, and I try to do those things each and every day. So I would say today I had several really wonderful interactions with patients. One, a brand new patient, which is kind of a special encounter. I always set aside an hour. We kind of go through life histories. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to high school? What was your claim to fame in high school? Normally when I'm meeting a new patient, I already know their whole cancer history. I've gone into the records and seen all of that before they walk in. But what I don't know is, where were you born and what was the size of the high school you went to? What were you engaged in high school? What's your profession? Those are really important. Taking care of other people is really a human endeavor, and knowing them and what their desires and likes are is important. So that's that first meeting with a patient. It's kind of getting to know their life story, sharing a little bit of my life story. I grew up in South Dakota, went to high school. But back to your question, I was sort of elaborating why that's an important question. So I would say, number one, interactions I had at work today have brought me great joy. And number two was engaging in physical activity with buddies at the YMCA at 5 a.m. And number three, I put together a family gathering this summer for my whole family, my brother and sister, their spouses, all of their kids and their spouses and all of their kids. We'd never, ever been in the same room at the same time. And a little off-brand for me, but we all went on a Disney cruise for a week, 16 of us, and 4 of the kids had never been on an airplane before and had never seen an ocean. So that was very joyful to have done that. So there's a few of the things that brought me joy since we last visited.
That's wonderful. What's your lasting memory of that trip? I mean, that sounds like
so the lasting memory is a grandnephew going, again, Uncle Dick, Peter, how about we do the yellow slide and the blue instead of the blue? No, the blue slide again. So yes, nonstop water slides and water fun.
Oh, well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. You mentioned you're growing up in South Dakota, and I did want to touch on a little bit of your background. I mentioned in the intro, the pre-recorded intro of this podcast, a little bit of your history. But I mean, for the folks listening in that may not know Dr. Deming, how does a small town kid from South Dakota end up becoming one of the top oncologists in the country, working in a building that bears his name?
Well, the answer to that is the same answer as how do you climb a mountain, one step at a time. And sometimes in a mountain, you do have an obvious fork in the road and you have to choose. I would say most of us don't even know all of the forks in the road that get us from birth to, age 71 and what led. Some are obvious choices, but some I think are serendipity and or, it's kind of the way the world works where everything is connected. So I had a great upbringing, fortunately growing up in the 50s. without, the modern conveniences, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't have. So life is simple, and you're not aspiring to have. I think it's harder nowadays to be satisfied with what you have because everyone sees what you don't have. So growing up in a very small town, 500 people in South Dakota, you've got a tricycle, you got a bicycle, you got everything you could possibly want. As we grew, by the time we were in fifth grade, we moved to a huge city of 5,000 people, which was amazing. I fortunately am good at taking tests and good at school, and I enjoyed school and really had great teachers and great people to inspire me. I also was involved in high school in speech, debate, and theater. So jumping ahead, and I'm going all over the place, but even though I'm great at taking tests and great at math and science, I think the skills that make me excel at being a physician taking care of patients one-on-one are probably more related to communication skills, speech skills, things I honed more in the humanities than in the sciences. But back in the 50s and 60s, and I graduated from high school in 1972, I kind of had this idea that math and science was where the real intellect was, and that the humanities were for people who couldn't do the math and science. I obviously don't believe that now, but so I went to college, and, having had one chemistry class in high school, because that's all there was, and doing well at it, I was like, okay, I'll be a chemistry major in college. And since I had never gone to school without taking a math class, I thought, well, I still have to take math every semester because that's what students do. And then first semester, I ended up taking a microbiology class. I thought, oh, this is fun. I'll be a double major in chemistry and microbiology. And of course, I need to take math. And I probably took just the bare minimum of humanities. And I did well, and then it comes down, about junior year, and the chemistry professor says, well, it's time to where you going to go to get your PhD in chemistry. And it's like, I really thought, oh my gosh, I don't think I have the scientific creativity to do. I wasn't afraid of getting a PhD or taking the studies or doing the tests. It's just like I had no idea what a PhD in chemistry did other than teach chemistry in college. And I really struggle with, do I have this scientific creativity? Yes, I get A's on all my science tests and get A's on all my math tests, but do I have the basic creativity? So it was at that point I thought about medicine as a career. And in all honesty, I thought of it more of a vocation. Like, I'll just go to vocational school, medical school. I mean, I not to sound cocky, but I knew I could excel at the MCAT, and that I could get in, and that I didn't really know a doctor, but I saw Marcus Welby on TV, and I knew that this would allow me to utilize my science into a profession that was kind of ready-made. It wasn't that I necessarily had this vision of what I was going to be, but that it was just part of this pathway. And I love school. So I spread my wings, and I went all the way to Omaha. So having grown up only in South Dakota, it was one of the biggest moves I made because, Omaha was like, oh my God, this is huge. It's like Manhattan, and I didn't mean Kansas. And I thought I was just like in the most metropolitan, amazing place. At Creighton, probably a third of my fellow classmates were from California, and they thought they just got dumped in a dusty cow town. And for me, it was like just the amazing opportunities. I loved medical school. When I started medical school, I accepted a Navy scholarship. So the Navy paid my way through medical school and gave me $200 a month to live on, which in the 1970s was really quite a bit. And again, if you think back, I was in high school in the 60s and early 70s. I had a draft number. I wasn't drafted, but, kids in my high school were. I was for South Dakota, long-haired hippie liberal. And the idea of going into the Navy, I didn't do it for patriotism. I did it for the scholarship. And I will tell you that my experience was amazing and I got out of it so much more. But I did it for the money. But when I graduated from medical school, the way it worked is now I'm a naval officer in '03 and went to the Naval Hospital San Diego for my internship in internal medicine. So here I am going to San Diego, California for my internship. Medical school was amazing, lots of camaraderie, just probably the best time of my life. But then now an intern in internal medicine. And I thought, well, since I'm in the Navy, I should have an experience I wouldn't otherwise have had I just gone into a civilian residency program. So I volunteered to go into one of the 2 military medical specialties, and that was undersea medicine, which is both submarines and diving. So I was sent to Connecticut, where the National Naval Submarine Medical Center is. And as part of your training to become an undersea medical officer is you get training on the physical and psychological demands of being on a submarine. Also, I was out on a submarine for 3 days with Admiral Rickover, who is the father of the nuclear navy. This was 1982. And then you go to Panama City, Florida, where the Navy Experimental Dive Unit is. And one of the perks of going into undersea medicine is you actually go through the full Navy scuba training program and also some of the surface supplied deep sea diving, so the big copper helmets and lead boots. And then once I finished my training, I was then assigned to go to Hawaii during peacetime, where I was taking care of parachute jumping, scuba diving, bomb disposal, frogmen in Hawaii. So it was like a sports medicine practice. We did diving, but we were mostly making sure that the folks under my care were prepared to be deployed at the drop of the hat, that they were up to date on all of their shots and vaccines, that they were up to date on their CPR and first aid, on their diving training and all of that. It also gave me a more of appreciation for the real joy that comes from pushing yourself physically. So I was not an athlete in high school or college. In medical school, I started running because in college, with all of my coursework, I never had a free moment. And all of a sudden now in medical school, everybody takes the same classes and they gave you noon hour off. And most of the gang would go over to the gym and play basketball. I was not an athlete, but the basketball facility had an indoor track. I think it was 10.5 laps to a mile. So if you've got enough caffeine in you and a little bit of OCD, running in a circle creates a long distance runner by the end of the year. So that became my sport, was long distance running. But then with the group of divers, and we were doing diving and then cycling and running and all sorts of activity. And again, I had never had the experience of being a jock, but that led me to understand the joy that can come from pushing yourself physically and setting goals and achieving them. And, long before Above and Beyond Cancer, I learned that if you don't reach above and beyond what you know you can attain, you have no idea what you're capable of. Had a lot of fun in Hawaii. It was professionally fulfilling, but it didn't seem like being a real doctor. And so then I decided to come back into a more traditional form of medicine, and that was radiation oncology. I was exposed to that during my internship year at the Naval Hospital in San Diego. I had a 1-month elective in radiology, And at that hospital, radiation therapy, as they called it back then, was a division of radiology. And so after a few days of looking at chest x-rays, which wasn't too exciting to me, I said, hey, can I go down to the basement? Because radiation therapy is always in the lowest level, of kind of like a dungeon. And that's where I had my first experience to radiation oncology. I thought of it as, I really thought it matched my talents. You do have to have a knowledge of math and physics. That was easy. But it was the first time I really realized that taking care of cancer patients, it's a lot of psychology and philosophy and theology, that every encounter, mortality is either obviously in the room or subliminally in the room. Because, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, most people who had cancer did not end up surviving cancer. And now they do. But death was, the concept of death was always present. And that's really a conversation that isn't about physics and biology and math, but more around, I would say, philosophy and theology and poetry and literature. So I knew that it matched my combination of right brain, left brain. So I then did my residency in radiation oncology at the University of California, San Francisco. I still technically was a naval officer, but I was at the university hospital and dressed as a civilian. But when I finished my residency, I still owed Uncle Sam 2 more years. And fortunately, my duty assignment was the National Cancer Institute and the Bethesda Naval Hospital. So Bethesda is just outside of Washington, D.C. Really a wonderful experience. Even though I was junior staff at the National Cancer Institute, it was almost like having an extra 2-year fellowship, because you're surrounded by so many brilliant people and so many conferences that it was very different than if I'd just gone to work at a community hospital as a radiation oncologist, where I'm the junior person in a very big department. And that was a wonderful experience living in Washington, D.C., And in looking back on my whole naval career, I went into it because of the scholarship, because of the money. What I got out of it was an opportunity during those 9 years of active duty to live in San Diego, Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. So that life experience and the opportunity to be part of the United States military, not just at a naval hospital, but the operational command I had. So a greater appreciation for what the military does. And I would say I have a great sense of pride now when I take care of veterans and say, oh yeah, I'm a veteran as well, and share that experience. Because most people who went to college and coming out of high school in the early 70s had a very negative comprehension of what the military might be. I think we were, it was difficult times for everyone. My brother, who's a year older than me, went right into the Navy out of high school. So he had a whole career as an enlisted person in the Navy. And it was at a time, again, where you might be drafted, and many people were and did go to Vietnam. And unlike the way we celebrate active duty military and veterans now, back then you're coming back from Vietnam and you're not being celebrated, and in fact you might be denigrated for doing your service. So having had that military experience, I'm very proud of that, but it wasn't something that I would have just chosen to go into, and I'm fortunate to have had that experience. So then I finished in Bethesda in 1989 and moved to Des Moines, Iowa. So I've been here for 36 years. So that was a very long answer to how did I get from South Dakota to here. But the forks in the road. So sometimes, I did make the decision to go into undersea medicine. I don't know what the other branch of that would have been. It would have been, but I did do that. I would say I look back now, and I've been a cancer doctor for 40 years. Part of my life story, which I haven't shared yet, is my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer when I was junior in high school. I know I'm choking up a little bit now, which is kind of strange because, that's so long ago. And a mom actually died. This was before chemotherapy. Who knows? Maybe she had, the same type of lung cancer Maria had. It could be she died when I was a second-year medical student. I never consciously made the decision from high school or college, I'm going to be a cancer doctor because mom has cancer. But I look back on my life and kind of wonder whether at certain forks in the road, whether, her invisible hand might have been guiding me to one side or the other. And so it is part of, I think, the way our background, our history, our personal stories might affect the path we choose even without us knowing it.
Yeah, I mean, hearing a lot of the Navy piece of your life where it took you beyond South Dakota and Omaha and beyond, it does help shape a lot of who you've become. And obviously, thank you for sharing that, first off. But then hearing the story about your mother, that's probably another massive piece that has shaped and created not only the person, but the doctor you've become.
Yeah. And I would say also my dad. So my mom and dad each died at age 52. Mom was older than dad by 3 years, died of cancer. And then 3 years later, I was an intern in San Diego, and dad at age 52 died of sudden cardiac death. In reality, they both died of cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking is not illegal. It's not immoral. They're good people. 50% of people back then smoked, but that resulted in their death. And mom's death was a long, slow journey at a time when people were not talking about having cancer. It was a bit of an embarrassment. And she never had, and I never took the opportunity to talk to mom about death and dying and living and thriving and finding joy. And then also understanding how different a sudden death is compared to a death that you see coming. So I think that both the experiences of both my mom and dad's death, I was a young adult, they were both 52, have allowed me to think about mortality at an earlier age and become more a friend of mortality. I'm not afraid of death. It allows me to, I think, more holistically talk to patients and people about mortality. Obviously, if none of us died, we would have been extinct as a species long ago. Also, the fact that we are going to die someday is really what makes living and finding joy so important. If we live forever, wasting a day of our life would be trivial. Is because we don't live forever that today becomes so important. And that is part of this embracing of life. As the Stoics would say, memento mori, remember you will die. That's not meant as a bummer, as, just go to bed, pull the covers over your head because you're going to die someday. It's actually a bugle call to wake you up to, you are not dead today. What are you going to do today to create an autobiography that's worth reading? And so mortality can serve to be an inspiration to just get off your butt and do something.
we, in our previous conversation after we stopped recording, we talked a little about Ryan Holiday and stoicism and memento mori, and kind of all that goes into it. I can't remember exactly. It might have been Marcus Aurelius that said something along the lines of he was laying in bed and it was a comfy, cozy situation, blankets covering him, and he wrote to himself, is this what you were made to do? Is lay in bed? No, get out of your bed and kind of seize the day. So I always appreciate the Stoic philosophy and some of the stuff that I've also learned along the way, which involves memento mori. Because I would say, like, put my hand up. I'm one of those guys that I want to live forever. Like, I've done a lot of things in my life to try to make sure I'm living healthy. I do also try to balance in, doing the things that bring me joy and have fun and be around my family as much as possible. And not just being around them, but being present around them. And I, through hearing you speak, and I've got some other places I do want to go with this, but this is too good to stop. I hear a lot of like spiritual underlying. You talked about how cancer treatment is part theology. How do you balance spirituality, religion, but then also science? Sometimes those two can't be in the same room or at the same table.
Yeah, some people would say that. I don't think that is true. It depends on how you define theology and spirituality. So I was raised Catholic, and I really appreciate that I was raised something, and that I had this upbringing. And when you're, as a little kid and going through then grade school and junior high, and I mean, we didn't go to Catholic school or anything. It was catechism on Saturday, but you learn something like it is facts. You learn theology and the Baltimore Catechism, and you learn this as if it is facts. And so you learn it that way. I think, like most people, by the time you get a teenager, and then, in the time I was living in the 60s and the hippie, and it's like, I no longer believe that is facts, but I'm glad that I had this upbringing that rooted me in what is Christianity, what is Catholicism, what is the religion. You can imagine a kid who likes to take tests and do well. I mean, I love memorizing the Baltimore Catechism and spitting it, reciting it back. And I love, getting the right answers. But if you think that religion is this theology is true, then you might have a hard time, especially if you believe that the Bible, especially the version written in English that we read, is like absolutely biological, geological facts. Well, yeah, you're going to have a hard time with reconciling science and religion. But I think most of us come to an understanding. I mean, especially once you travel around the world and you understand that there are people that, it's not like they've rejected Christianity. It's not like as a 12-year-old, I had rejected Buddhism. I had never heard of Buddhism or, 20 different religions. I just was learning what was given to me. But once you travel and you do some thinking about it, I am not certain that there is a God in the same way that some people think of a entity that controls everything. I do, why is there anything? As a scientist, I can go from the Big Bang to now without, an all-knowing, all-loving, omnipotent, omnipresent thing. The Big Bang forward is like a blueprint in physics. But why was there a Big Bang? That's not something science can answer. Is why was something created out of nothing. So, and then as you travel and you see people practicing many, many different religions, the various forms of Hinduism that are practiced, and the various forms of Buddhism, and, Islam and Judaism, and the various forms of Christianity, I take away that they're all just ways of getting to know the concept of something bigger than ourselves. And I'm open to the possibility that it's not just science, and I'm open to the possibility that things happen and there's interactions that happen that are put in place by something we can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't fundamentally, I love studying all the different theologies, but I don't honestly think that the Christian theology is any more factual than, Ganesh getting the head of an elephant. I think those are stories that tell us about how to look at life situation and how to live ethically and morally. When a patient, so my role in exploring spirituality as it interfaces with with medicine is, number one, what is the patient's spiritual perspective? Sometimes it can make a difference in how you treat them. So a Jehovah's Witness may not take blood products because of religious belief, or other types of procedures or diets might be off limits based on the theology. So you want to know that, but you also want to know how their concept of religion might affect their decision making, especially when it comes down to stage 4 cancer, where there's often a tension between how aggressive is the treatment and what side effects are you going to have. Even with the most aggressive treatment, you're not going to cure the cancer, versus accepting what's going to come naturally, and how do you want to die, and how do you want to be cared for. So those are important, but it's also gives an opportunity to help patients through fearful times. So here in Des Moines, Iowa, the majority of patients I care for would check the box of being a Christian. But I would tell you that when it comes to facing death, even though the Christian theology would tell you you're going to go to heaven and it's all going to be better and you're going to be better, that doesn't resolve most of the fears that people have about mortality. And maybe some of it is, some of us grew up at a time where we actually talked about heaven and hell. They don't talk about hell as much anymore. It seems like everybody's on the path to heaven, but maybe some people are still wondering, gosh, which direction am I going? But so having an interest in spirituality, number one, I think, is a human. We are driven as humans to wonder about that it is a natural thing to question the unknown and to wonder what causes it. Back in early times, things like thunderstorms and lightning and thunder and all sorts of natural things that we didn't have an explanation for would be attributed to the various gods of thunder, gods of lightning. Now, there are still things that we can't answer scientifically, and we might look for other answers. But I would say mortality, the fact that we will die. What happens after we die? Do we just fray in the ground or a river, or is there something more? And that's a natural thing to wonder about, to question. And when you're taking care of patients on a cancer journey, being open to conversation. I'm not an expert on it, but at my cancer center, I do have spiritual advisors that are experts on it. So part of my role is to help ascertain whether there is some conflict in their own mind about where they are spiritually, and then to provide professionals that can help guide them as just one of the dimensions of caring for someone with cancer.
I haven't really crossed many paths of doctors, or crossed the path with doctors that really have a true balance to the treatment, the science and medicine of it all. But then, also with the individual aspect, you talk often about meaning and purpose. We just talked about spirituality. You talk about the pursuit of joy, which we have mentioned earlier in this conversation. Well, when did you move from what you phrased as treating to now caring for patients?
Yeah. It was an evolution. And I think part of it was when I came to Des Moines, Iowa, I was all done with my training. And for the previous 9 years, the Navy told me where to go every 2 years. And then I made the decision to come here. And it was like, I am no longer on this track of moving every 2 years. Is this what I want? And I even remember when I came here, I finally had to tell myself just to settle myself down. It's because I'm like, what decision are you making? It's only for 2 years, but then as it's like, okay, is this what I want? And I started intellectually pursuing and spending time journaling. It's what does bring me joy, and spent time, reading philosophy, and also, engaging in life, but thinking about that. And I think the more that I thought about that and understood what brought me, Dick Deming, joy in Des Moines, Iowa, made me more interested in also asking patients about their joy and helping them realize that, yes, you're on this journey with cancer. It's just part of your life, that sharing joyful things with them and asking them what brings them joy. Knowing that I derived benefit in terms of meaning and purpose by asking myself that question. And so as I saw myself not just as a killer of cancer cells, but as someone who cares for their patients, it just was obvious to me that this is part of health and well-being, and started not focusing on that to the exclusion of the math and science and the killing of cancer cells, but as just part of a ministry of healing.
From that was born a cancer survivorship program, which you did allude to earlier. You're the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. You guys are entering, I think, 15 years coming up?
Yes.
15.
In April will be a 15-year anniversary of Above and Beyond Cancer.
Incredible. And you all take a holistic approach to treating cancer. I mean, you were teaching cycling classes at the local YMCA. Are you still doing that?
I am, yes, for 16 years now.
Incredible.
So that started before Above and Beyond. So it's really, yes, this mind, body, spirit approach to life. And because I'm a cancer doctor, it's the mind, body, spirit approach to cancer survivorship. But it's really a philosophy of life that is, whether you have cancer, heart disease, Parkinson's disease, stroke, or you think you're as fit as a fiddle and going to live forever, it's an approach to life that is mind, body, spirit. And that is, how do you find more joy in a life engaging in physical activity that gives you goals and the joy of pursuing vigorous physical activity. Second, to do it with the camaraderie of other people and the sort of the spiritual joy. And we use spiritual kind of as this intangible, not so much theology, but this appreciation that there's something in life bigger than we are. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to just say it's the blueprint of the world, but that there is something bigger than we are, and that can create awe and wonder in one's life. And then there's also the knowledge aspect. So, every Wednesday night for 16 years now, it's been part of the cancer education series. So it's knowledge is power. Then I teach a spin class. It's physical activity. And then we come together for fellowship and fruit smoothies. So it's that whole trifecta of mind, body, spirit. And it could be done in the context of anything, but since I'm a cancer doctor and these are cancer survivors, that's the way we frame this. So 16 years we've been doing that. So we now have physical activities, about 20 of them every week. So in addition to my indoor cycling class, we have outdoor cycling in the summer. We have outdoor hiking, outdoor pole walking. We have also meditation, yoga, tai chi, qigong, water aerobics, land aerobics, cross training, weightlifting, rowing. We've got a group that has a boat this year, is going to compete in the regatta, a group of 8 breast cancer survivors that are rowing. We do ballroom dancing, forest bathing, paddleboarding, cooking classes, book club. So all of those things happen out in the community for cancer survivors and their family members. And then Above and Beyond Cancer also does some very practical things. We provide free hotel rooms for anyone getting cancer care in the state of Iowa who's getting their cancer care more than 50 miles away from home. So whether they're in Sioux City or Dubuque or, Iowa City or Creston, or we provide those hotel rooms for them. And then once a year, I take a group of cancer survivors and caregivers on a mind, body, spirit journey somewhere in the world with 2 focuses. One, and these 2 focuses both come out of what I've seen come out of individuals who've gone through their cancer journey. And those 2 focuses are, we alluded to a little bit when we talked about Maria. Most people, when they come through their cancer journey, come through with this sense of gratitude for everyone that had helped them along the way. And this sense of gratitude goes into a paying forward desire to help others. And then the second would be going through the cancer journey. You come to an understanding of the strength you have within yourself. I wouldn't necessarily say that cancer gives you strength. I think we all have so much more strength within ourselves than we realize. But cancer, like any bump in the road, allows you to find the strength that you have within yourself. And it's finding that strength and understanding you have that strength that we call resiliency. And you may come out the other end, not with post-traumatic stress, but actually with post-traumatic growth, that going through a difficult time with support, you get an understanding of what you're capable of, and you might intentionally put a mountain in your pathway. So sometimes a mountain just drops from the sky, like a cancer diagnosis, unasked for, and you climb it. And you understand the strength that you have in doing so. But other times, you might intentionally put a mountain in your pathway. I mean, literally a mountain, or, you sign up to do a marathon, or you sign up to go to graduate school, or you have the courage to, you and your spouse have a kid, or any one of a number of things. And so these journeys that we take, number one, do put a mountain in the pathway. So they allow individuals to take on a challenge, to have the courage and confidence to take on a challenge they don't know they're going to be able to accomplish. But they know that trying to accomplish it is going to bring them great joy. So that's the reaching above and beyond. But we also make sure that every journey we go on, we have a component of paying it forward, if you will. So we do some humanitarian service work at a cancer center that serves the most underserved population in the country that we're going to. So these mind, body, spirit journeys, I'll have a humanitarian component and then a big physical challenge. And we promise suffering along the way. We know that we're not We're not flying first class. We're not staying in wonderful hotels. We're in tents, and you can be guaranteed that somebody's tent's going to leak, so the zipper's going to break. There will be bad weather. You will get diarrhea. There will be blisters, but that's part of this whole experience. So Above and Beyond Cancer does that once a year, but the other things I mentioned, the physical activities and the hotel program, that happens, 365 days a year.
You promise suffering after all of that actual suffering, and people are willing to sign up.
They're willing
and continue to go
up
for 16 years.
Yes.
and
So,
counting.
Yep.
How often are you on these trips? Have you gone on every single one?
Yeah. Yes.
Gone on every single one.
Yes.
I saw, I believe India is next year.
It's Nepal.
Nepal.
So we're going back to the Himalaya mountains. So it's really right up where Nepal and Tibet, the border of Nepal and Tibet is where the Himalaya mountains are. And the reason we're going back there is that our very first trip was to Everest Base Camp in the Himalayas.
Mhm.
So since then, we've been to many different continents and, summited Kilimanjaro 3 different times, and South America, Machu Picchu, and then most recently southern Patagonia, Torre del Paine, and we've done Mount Kailash in Tibet, and we've done Utah and Wyoming and Colorado. But yes, we do. We suffering is inevitable, and it's really how do you take a bump in the road of life and use it as a springboard and not a barrier, and to accept that, for some people, a hangnail can just be traumatic, or, but for others who've been through a cancer journey, what's a little rain? What's a blister? Plus you're doing it with the support of others. And it's not about, first one up the mountain plants the flag wins. It's how do we get everybody together up the mountain.
All right, this is that point in the conversation where we're going to take a quick pause. We're going to get you back into this conversation with Dr. Richard Deming in just a second. But I wanted to throw out a reminder that if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you're following us on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and also listening on Apple Podcasts. That is the best way to support us. Interact, like, subscribe, do all those things, and share with your friends. Let them know the conversations that we're having here on Good&Game, and we'll keep them going. If you like this conversation, hey, make sure you go back to episode 2.1 with Carrie Johansson from the Iowa Environmental Council, or go back to our summer collection. A lot of good conversations in there as well. All right, let's get you back to this conversation with Dr. Richard Deming. All right, so the focus of this fall series of conversations kind of revolves around environmental impact and that it has on Iowans. So kind of shifting now a little bit into that mode. You have obvious love of nature, and it kind of inspired, or I guess how much has your love of nature inspired finding out what's going on in Iowa?
So I would say being outdoors, and that is another way of saying nature, outdoor nature, natural beauty. I came to realize how important that was in my own personal joy, my own sense of fulfillment. So as I realized that, I mean, I'm not the first person to realize that. There's books written on it. And, I have read books and read studies, and like many people, if something, it seems natural to me, and then you see there's other studies, you just believe it even more, and you then affirm it by looking at other studies and others, literature and people that have written about it. So it's absolutely clear that even if it's just, the sense of light and the sense of openness, but it could be the chemicals we're breathing in from the forest. It could be, a number of things. But I find very, very, very few people who don't have a positive sense by being out in nature. I would say my interest in being a conservationist, if we want to use that term, or environmentalist, really does stem from my appreciation of the being outdoors and the beauty of being outdoors. But there's also this sense of I am a doctor, a medical doctor, and I care for patients, and I want the patient in front of me today. I want to do everything I can to make sure they have the best possible health. It is a very natural extension to say, I want this person to have the best possible health, to I want my community to have the best possible health, to I want my planet to have the best possible health. So I think that that's an extension of caring. But I would also say that once you understand the role that the community, and maybe we start talking about social determinants of health and the way that we live in the built world that might affect our health and the outcomes of healthcare, to the planet and the role that the environment might play in terms of the way it affects our health. All of those things come together from a caring to a preventing to a the interconnection of nature with all humans. So I think that those together have made me an environmentalist. But part of it is, yes, running through parks and then paddling in the rivers and climbing the mountains. It is not only less pleasant, but just psychologically disturbing when you're doing that in the midst of pollution and man-made degradation of nature that we have the ability to control, the ability to influence. So being involved in organizations that attempt to learn everything we can learn about why our land and water is not as pristine as it could be, and what are reasonable things that we can do to mitigate the causes of the degradation of our land and water.
So when you hear the numbers, and obviously you're well tuned into what's happening, 1 in 20 Iowans will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their life. How does that, as someone that works in this field, how does that hit you?
Yeah, so actually, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed with cancer over the course of a lifetime. So it is, that's a fact. It isn't so much.
Is that statewide or countrywide?
That's the country.
Okay.
The country.
Wow.
Okay. But you're right. I think the focus on Iowa is the statistic that's more meaningful to me than what you just said, mm-hmm. is how do we compare to other states? Mm-hmm. And the fact that we have the second highest incidence of cancer of any state in the country. And the only state that has a higher incidence is Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about, what causes cancer and why do some states have higher incidence than others? Kentucky has a very high incidence. They have one of the highest incidence of cigarette smoking. And today, even in Iowa, the number one modifiable risk factor that causes cancer is cigarette smoking. In Iowa, we have a lower than national average of cigarette smoking, so that doesn't explain why we're second in the nation in terms of incidence. But before I talk about other things that cause cancer, not only are we second in terms of incidence to Kentucky, we're one of only 2 states where the incidence is going up. Even Kentucky, the incidence of cancer is going down year after year. We're one of 2. The other one is a little fluke. It's a state with a low incidence of cancer, but it's gone up a little bit, and that is Utah.
Okay.
And that may be because there's a lot of non-Mormons that are moving into Utah with lifestyles that have a little bit more higher risk of cancer than the traditional Utah population. So Utah is technically the incidence is going up, but they have a very low incidence. Iowa, the incidence is continuing to go up. And with Kentucky going down and Iowa going up, we may end up being number one in terms of incidence. So as a scientist, what is causing the epidemic of cancer in Iowa relative to other states? So you look at the known risk factors. And that is, first of all, let me just say that one of the risk factors of cancer is getting older, but this incidence ranking is age adjusted, meaning it's not because Iowa is older. That is taken out of the equation by the way the statistics are kept. And so it's an age adjusted incidence for cancer. So what are other factors besides getting older that increase the risk of having cancer? We've mentioned one, and that's cigarette smoking. Another is obesity, increase the risk of cancer. Third is eating too many calories and not the right food. So not eating enough fruits and vegetables, eating too many highly processed foods, and frankly, just eating too many calories. That causes cancer. Next is physical activity. So not having enough physical activity increases the risk of cancer. And in fact, the triad of obesity, eating the wrong foods, and not doing physical activity, those things together cause almost as many cancers as cigarette smoking. Alcohol consumption causes cancer. Infectious diseases causes cancer. So one measure of what we can do to reduce the risk of infectious diseases is HPV, human papilloma virus, causes 6 different cancers. The HPV vaccination can prevent those 6 cancers. So not having your HPV vaccines, and in this time and era, I'm afraid of people not having all sorts of vaccines. That one specifically is designed to prevent cancer. We talked about radon. When Iowa has a much higher radon, it's not a pollutant. It's naturally occurring in our geology. It seeps up through our basements. We know it causes lung cancer. Probably also contributes to many of the other cancers. So that's one of the things that makes Iowa different than other states is radon. Sun exposure causes cancer. Stress causes cancer. We're probably not exactly certain exactly how it does and how to measure that and how to reduce it. But when you look at most of those factors I mentioned, Iowa's kind of in the middle of the road. Radon is definitely one of the things that is different about Iowa than the other states, and probably is one of the factors that is contributing to our high incidence. The other factor is environmental exposures to toxins. And that is where Iowa also is different than the rest of the country in a major way. And that is when you look at the amount of chemicals that we spread per square mile of land, Iowa's number one. There are studies being done to try to determine, could all of the chemical exposure, now some chemical exposure is industrial, some is, plastics and PFAS and red dye, but in Iowa, pretty much everybody, no matter what state you live in, are exposed to plastics and all of those normal household chemicals. What we're exposed to in Iowa that is different than other states is the amount of commercial chemicals that are spread on the land that do a great deal of good in terms of productivity of crops, but you don't have to be a farmer spreading pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers to be exposed to those. It all comes down into our water. And right now in Des Moines, Iowa, throughout the summer, even though we've had all this rain, we've had to say you can't water because we can't get enough nitrate out of the system. The nitrates in our water, which is all purely a factor of, or largely a factor of, the fertilizers and the manure, which sometimes is fertilizer, but sometimes it's from confined animal operations where the manure isn't spread on the fields as manure for fertilizer, but just comes into our water supply. So you don't have to be a farm kid to be exposed to chemicals. Again, it's risks and benefits. There's no doubt. I mean, even cigarette smoking is not illegal, but once we know that it causes cancer, we put into effect public health policies to try to discourage that. First step is let's learn the association between the various chemicals and cancer, not for the purpose of making it illegal, but for the purpose of then coming up with public policy that would mitigate its getting into the water. Farmers don't want to put on more chemicals than they need. So if we can learn what are the agricultural practices, whether it is a buffer strip around the field, whether it's cover crops in the winter, whether it's, any one of them. I'm not an expert on that. But then the public policy would say, let's create credits and penalties that try to influence people to do what's ultimately the right thing. You want somebody to do something, you create incentives or penalties. So right now, most of our Nutrient Reduction Act, which is to try to get less of the nitrates into the water that ends up in the Gulf of Mexico, we had as a strategy to reduce that by, and I don't remember the exact figures, let's say it was to reduce it by 30% in 10 years. Well, guess what happened in 10 years? We went up by 200% because our nutrient, and those were approximate numbers, but the nutrient reduction strategy didn't have any carrots or sticks, as we would say, or credits and penalties. So again, I'm advocating for learning as much as we can about the relationship between various environmental chemicals and cancer. Cancer is not the only thing, but I'm a cancer doctor. But I mean, there's research that it may contribute to neurologic conditions, perhaps things like Parkinson's. Certainly, it can produce fertility issues, a number of issues. So again, let's know what we can about it. And then once we have the knowledge, let's create public policy that helps mitigate all of our exposure to these things. Our life today is much better in so many ways than it was in the Middle Ages. I mean, we're not going to go back to no plastics. But can we get a better handle for what everything modernity is doing to us? Our life expectancy, for the most part, has increased. It's gone down a little bit with COVID and everything, but for the most part, compared to the 1400s, it's gone up. So we have benefited from modernity, but we also have to understand that some of what modernity has given us has created health problems, and knowledge is power, and then using that knowledge to create public policy to help reduce the risks. So being involved in conservation, in environmentalism, is an extension of my desire to care for people, to care for communities, care for the planet, and a little bit from a narrower point of view as a cancer doctor, knowing that we've got a super high incidence of cancer in Iowa, to try to reduce that incidence by mitigating against the effect of some of these toxins in our air and our water.
I think it'd be interesting to just, I've heard you riff on this a little bit, but how does radon or nitrates actually cause cancer?
So radon, I'm a little bit more knowledgeable because that's radiation, and how does radiation cause cancer? But before I answer that, let me just say, what's the fundamental cause of cancer? And the fundamental cause of cancer is mutations. So a cell mutates changes in a way that it doesn't have all the characteristics of a normal cell. So normal cells in the body, as one cell becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, but as they start approaching their neighbor cells, they stop multiplying and dividing. They stop undergoing this uncontrolled cell growth. Yes, a cell dies, they'll replace it, but they don't just continue to grow. A cancer cell develops because a normal cell, so a cancer cell is not like an alien from Mars. It's also not like a bacteria that entered the body from outside. It is a human cell that is changed, and part of the ending change is it doesn't stop growing when it touches its neighbors, and it has the potential to metastasize and spread elsewhere. But the act of a cell undergoing mutation is part of the blueprint of life. So we became a species from that first cell that then became multiple cells, that then became fish and amphibians and birds and then mammals and then mammals. That each of those steps along the way was because a mutation happened. Some mutations evolve us as a species and make us taller, stronger, faster, and better looking. Some mutations cause cancer. But the blueprint of life created a immune system that, for the most part, when we have a cell that goes rogue, becomes mutated, our immune system takes care of it. As we get older, our immune system isn't as good. So one of the reasons why older people get cancer more than younger people is our immune system. Our eyes don't work as good. Our ears don't work as good. Our teeth don't work as well. But our immune system doesn't work as well. So mutations happen, and they're part of the blueprint of life. Some things increase the risk of those mutations. So some mutations happen spontaneously. Doesn't require plastic or radiation or nitrate. It happens spontaneously. That's the blueprint of life. But there's other things that can make mutations happen more frequently, and that's what increased the risk of cancer over the baseline risk. And ionizing radiation. So ironically, radiation is used to kill cancer cells. Chemotherapy is used to kill cancer cells. Both radiation and chemotherapy can cause cancer. Radiation, having studied radiation biology, we understand kind of what's the fundamental thing that happens when ionizing radiation interacts with a cell and causes a change in the genetic makeup of the cell, and a mutation happens, and that can lead to cancer. Mm-hmm. Chemicals can also do the same thing, and different chemicals cause mutations within cells in different ways. And I'm definitely not a cell biologist and can't tell you how everything happens, but it's fundamentally mutations. Some happen spontaneously, but there are other external factors that can increase mutations.
So what do we know about nitrates and some other?
We know a lot.
Okay.
We know a lot.
Yeah. We guess you don't need to dive into everything.
Yeah.
But,
So let me do a 30-second deep dive into cigarette smoking.
Yeah.
So we know, to pretty much every scientist's satisfaction, except maybe some that have long time tenure and retirement accounts from tobacco companies, but to most every other scientist we know, cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. It took us decades to figure out one thing led to one cancer. We're now trying to look at thousands of different chemicals causing dozens of different cancers. We don't have that smoking gun of the direct cause, effect, and relationship. So some people would say, you haven't proven that nitrates cause colon cancer. You haven't proven that glyphosate causes B-cell lymphoma. But there is a lot of evidence that associates and shows that exposure does increase the risk of many different types of cancers. And if you look at there's a couple of maps. One map is just the number of tons of chemicals per square mile. And then another map with the same color code is the incidence of cancer. And there's absolutely a correlation between the incidence of various types of cancers with the amount of chemicals that are distributed in that part of the environment. Same sort of map can be shown for something like radon. So we have a clear association. Right now, the Harkin Institute and the Iowa Environmental Council have hired a PhD researcher to do a thorough white paper on what is the current status of our knowledge on the relationship between chemical exposure and cancer. So that will be, a paper that will summarize the current state of the knowledge. There are already countries that have declared that certain chemicals cause certain cancers and have forbidden them. We are not there, and what we hope to do is educate people on what's the current level of science, what additional studies need to be done, but then combine that with what are practices that can mitigate all of those chemicals getting into our air and our water.
You're a fairly measured man. You come across calm, cool, collected. I'm sure just the nature of your profession has helped shape you and lead you to that point. But I'm curious, just what's your level of concern with where we're at right now on some of this?
Yeah, it's high, but you, yes, there are two different ways of approaching an argument. One is to just yell and scream and call the other side idiots and blind. Nobody in this is an idiot, and everyone, I think, has the concern of the welfare of our population, but there is a tension between the economic livelihood of some people and some measures that might mitigate risk. So that's always a tension. You saw it played out really strongly in the decades-long campaign to reduce cigarette smoking, with the tactics of the tobacco industry. And, it's not surprising that they found other ways of using tobacco to make products that can be sold. The same thing will happen in agriculture. There will be some individuals who work for companies whose financial livelihood is based on the more product you sell, the more the company may be worth. And so that's can influence the way they may approach discussing a particular topic. And that can be concerning. I think that the best way to handle it, as you've noticed, is to try to have dialogue, try to have understanding. But there will come a time where we will have different views of what the data says. And it's always good to know who is paying the salary of the person who is speaking. You follow the money. It doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is not true, but, it does influence the message. That's why we have conflict of interest statements. That's why we want to know, is somebody saying something, but they're also financially benefited from what they're saying. I would say that the cancer survivors, patients, and doctors that I'm talking to, in some perverse way, my earning power might be increased by having things that cause more cancer. By speaking out for public health policy to reduce cancer, I am not speaking from a from a financial advantage point of view, I'm actually in some ways advocating to eliminate my job and my compensation. So I only mention that because that is important to know. The messenger, do they have a personal financial stake in the message?
Couple follow-ups there. So Elise Pohl is the doctor that is in charge, the scientist that is in charge of the IEC research paper teamed up with Harkin and the Iowa Farmers Union. Before we get to that conversation, what are some things you, as someone that has a vested interest in this, what would you like to see from her report that could maybe shift this from correlation to causation?
That's a good question. What is cause and effect? I think part of it is,
or can we even get there? Yeah.
Yeah. We probably don't get to the cause and effect in a direct way as you might in some scientific experiments, because it's likely that it's multiple things all together. And there could be that several different chemicals together have a synergistic effect in terms of mutations. And for a normal cell to mutate into a cancer cell, probably has to have several different things to happen to it. So I would say once there's the preponderance of evidence that associates, and the public also looks at it and believes it, it becomes really more accepted. And the number of papers that already are showing the increased risk of cancer based on the exposure to various chemicals, it's in my mind, looking at the literature that already exists, I personally already believe that there is a relationship between being exposed to chemicals and to cancer. I also believe that the data shows that drinking alcohol increases the risk of cancer. I drink alcohol. I mean, of course, like everyone, I drink just a very small amount in moderation. Mm-hmm. But it's understanding that there is a cause and effect. It's not saying we're going to outlaw everything. My mom and dad, died of cigarette smoking. I never smoked cigarettes, but we still don't advocate to make it illegal, but to make people understand the risks and also the degree of risk. I'm not afraid to drink a glass of tap water if I'm thirsty. I do understand that drinking filtered water might reduce my risk, but then it's also what is the magnitude of the risk and what's the magnitude of the reduction of risk if we do mitigation. Kind of a silly example would be we could probably save lives if we forced every driver of every car to wear a full race driver helmet. You probably would have fewer brain deaths from car accidents. How many would we reduce, and is it worth the inconvenience and expense of just like safety belts, you forced everybody to wear a helmet in their car? We're not going there. So it's not like, do we do everything possible to make the least chance of having cancer? No. Part of life is living life and accepting risks for certain things. But if we can reduce the risk of cancer by doing some practical mitigation that at least gets Iowa back down to the same incidence of cancer of some of the other ag states around Iowa, we will have saved lives. And most of us believe that there are public policy initiatives that can mitigate the risk without bankrupting any chemical company or adversely affecting the financial livelihood of agriculture.
Dr. Deming, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, I'm just kind of curious, you're 71 now. You're going to be climbing a mountain next spring. You got a lot. Still feels like 71 is the new 50. What's down the pipeline for you?
Well, I love what I'm doing. I get a great deal of joy out of, climbing mountains and running and biking and swimming and hiking. But there's a joy that comes out of, helping people on a cancer journey that isn't satisfied by those pursuits. So fortunately, I can do it all and have it all and want to continue as long as I have a sound mind to continue to do what I'm doing, be engaged in the individual care of patients. But also, with what I do in my office, I get to help one patient at a time every half hour or hour. But in public policy and advocacy, if we're successful, we can affect millions of lives. So to be able to have both and is a nice thing.
You're not setting. You may have a couple more Carnival cruises or Disney cruises in your future, but you're not ready to set sail on your career by any means.
No. I have a lot more career left in me than I have cruises.
I love it. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
That will do it for this conversation on Good&Game. Hopefully you found the conversation with Dr. Richard Deming equal parts informational and inspiring. I want to thank you for tapping into Good&Game. If you haven't already, be sure to follow us on Spotify, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. Next week on G&G, we're taking the conversation on the road. We're off to the Van Arkel farm in Grinnell, Iowa. Zach Van Arkel is a third-generation farmer on his family's land, where for the past couple decades, they have used conservation practices in an effort to be good stewards of the land. Be good, but be game too.
I think those lines of communication need to be open and people need to know, here's what's happening. At the end of the day, people are good, I want to believe that and that they will make the right decision towards what's good for others.